Last time, I flagged a real gap in how we've covered this whole story. We spent a lot of time testing the claims that got challenged in hearings and almost no time testing the ones that didn't. Today, I want to actually fix that and go statistic by statistic through the numbers Patel repeats most consistently across multiple friendly settings without anyone in the room pushing back. Not because I assume they're wrong, because I think fairness means applying the exact same rigor to numbers that support someone as to numbers that challenge them. 60 minutes. Let's actually do the audit properly. Fast version. Across multiple hearings, Patel cites a consistent set of figures describing his tenure's results: arrests, weapons seized, gang organizations disrupted, children rescued, fentanyl seized. These numbers show up repeatedly, phrased almost identically each time, which itself is worth noting. Consistent repetition across appearances suggests they come from a prepared internal figure rather than being invented on the spot, which is a real point in their favor before we even get into verification. The 23,000 arrests figure. Worked through. Here's the first number. Roughly 23,000 arrests, cited as a headline achievement of his tenure. What would actually verify this? DOJ and FBI do publish some aggregate arrest and enforcement data periodically, though not always in real time, and not always broken down the way a single-cited figure like this would need to be checked against. The number itself is plausible on its face. A federal law enforcement agency the size of the FBI, over a roughly year-long period, making tens of thousands of arrests in coordination with state and local partners, isn't an implausible scale. What's missing in every hearing where this number comes up is the specific time period it covers, whether it includes joint task force arrests where the FBI played a supporting rather than leading role, and how it compares to the equivalent period under the prior director. Without those three things, the number is stated, not yet independently contextualized. The fentanyl seizure claim, the one that needs the most caution. This next one deserves real care because it's phrased in a way that sounds precise, but is actually one of the vaguer claims in the set. Fentanyl seizures described as enough to kill a third of America. Worth explaining why this specific framing is hard to verify meaningfully. Lethal dose calculations for fentanyl depend heavily on assumed purity, assumed dosage thresholds, and methodology choices that vary significantly between different public health and law enforcement sources. This exact style of claim, enough fentanyl to kill X number of people, has been used by multiple administrations at multiple levels of government for years and has been criticized by some public health researchers as potentially overstating real-world lethality risk depending on the assumptions used. That's not a claim specific to Patel or this administration. It's a recurring pattern in how fentanyl seizure statistics get communicated publicly in general across many agencies over many years. The underlying seizure volume could be entirely real and substantial. The kill a third of America framing specifically is the kind of dramatic translation that deserves real skepticism, regardless of who's using it. The 4,700 children figure, checked carefully. A more emotionally weighted claim, 4,700 children found or rescued, cited in the context of anti-trafficking and child exploitation work. This is worth treating with real care in both directions, because it's the kind of number nobody wants to seem like they're questioning, and also exactly the kind of number that deserves the most careful sourcing, precisely because of how emotionally significant it is. What would verify it? DOJ's Child Exploitation and Obstruction section and FBI's own Innocence Lost program do publish some data on recovered minors connected to trafficking investigations. Whether this specific 4,700 figure matches published data from those specific programs over a specific time period comparable to prior years isn't something confirmed in any hearing transcript we've reviewed. The claim deserves to be taken seriously as a real and important category of work. It also deserves the same sourcing scrutiny as any other statistic, precisely because its emotional weight makes it less likely to get challenged in the room. The 1,600 gang and criminal enterprise figure. Less discussed than the others, but worth including, roughly 1,600 gang and criminal enterprise organizations disrupted. This is genuinely the hardest of the five to independently assess from outside, because disrupted is a broad, undefined term that could mean anything from a full takedown with multiple arrests to a single confirmed intelligence lead that interrupted one specific operation. Different organizations define disruption differently for internal metrics purposes, and without knowing which definition is being used here, the raw number is difficult to weigh against comparable historical figures. Comparing all five to the 14-year figure. Here's the comparison I think is actually the most useful part of today's whole episode. The 14-year vacancy figure we covered in a previous video came out because Senator Coons pushed for it directly under adversarial questioning, and it then got independently referenced and cross-examined in a separate later hearing by a different senator. That's a number that's been pressure-tested twice by two different people in two different rooms. These five statistics, the arrests, the fentanyl, the children, the weapons, the disrupted organizations, have not, in anything we reviewed, received that same second layer of independent testing. They get repeated confidently and consistently, which is a real point in their favor. But repetition across friendly settings isn't the same evidentiary category as being pressure tested by a skeptical questioner and surviving that test. The 14-year figure has survived a test. These five haven't been given one yet. Why this comparison matters and what it doesn't prove. I want to be precise about what this comparison actually shows, because it would be easy to overstate it. It doesn't mean the crime statistics are false. It doesn't mean the 14-year figure is more important. It means we currently have meaningfully different levels of confidence in each, based purely on how much independent scrutiny each has actually received, which is exactly the kind of distinction that gets lost when every number from a hearing gets treated with equal weight, regardless of whether anyone actually checked it. Full fairness pass on the whole set of statistics. All right, real pushback in both directions on all five numbers. In favor of taking them seriously, officials generally don't invent large, specific, wildly false statistics they expect the public and eventually journalists to check. The fact that these numbers are repeated consistently in the same form across multiple appearances suggests they trace back to an actual internal tracking figure rather than being improvised. Federal law enforcement agencies do maintain internal metrics for exactly this kind of public reporting. In favor of continued caution, consistent repetition of a number doesn't make it independently verified. It just means the same internal figure keeps getting cited. The fentanyl kill a third of America framing specifically deserves real skepticism, given how that style of claim has been criticized across multiple administrations for overstating real-world risk through methodology choices. And the 1,600 disrupted figure remains genuinely too vague in its current phrasing to weigh against any comparable historical baseline. What people who actually study government statistics say. Public health researchers who study drug seizure statistics specifically have noted across multiple administrations that enough to kill X number of people framing for fentanyl seizures depends heavily on assumed purity and dosage thresholds that vary significantly between sources, a pattern of concern that predates this specific administration and applies to how these numbers get communicated broadly across government, not to any one official specifically. Government transparency researchers on large, round headline enforcement statistics generally recommend treating any figure without a specified time period, comparison baseline, or sourcing methodology as stated, not yet verified, a category distinct from both confirmed and false, and one that applies to statistics cited by officials of every party in every administration when those statistics haven't been independently audited. Federal law enforcement data specialists note that terms like disrupted in organized crime reporting are genuinely inconsistently defined across different internal agency metrics, which is exactly why comparing a raw disruption count across different time periods or different agencies without knowing the underlying definition used is difficult to do responsibly. Real talk. Why auditing friendly numbers actually matters. This matters because the instinct to relax scrutiny the moment a number number sounds impressive and supportive rather than critical is exactly how unverified statistics quietly become accepted public fact through repetition in comfortable settings rather than through actual independent confirmation. That happens with officials of every party describing every kind of institutional success, and it's worth catching regardless of which administration or which specific claim is involved. It's also a genuinely useful transferable habit. Whenever you hear a round, impressive number from any official in any hearing on any topic, the first question worth asking isn't, is this true or false? It's, has this specific number actually been independently tested by anyone yet, or has it only ever been repeated? What to watch for next? Watch for whether DOJ or FBI ever publishes underlying methodology for any of these 5 figures specifically, which would move them from stated to genuinely verifiable. Watch for whether any future hearing, friendly or adversarial, actually presses Patel to define what disrupted means in the 1600 figure specifically. And watch for whether independent public health researchers ever directly address the specific fentanyl lethality claim as phrased in this administration's testimony. That's the audit. 5 confident, consistently repeated numbers, none of them independently pressure tested the way the 14-year figure has been. Not confirmed false, not confirmed true either, just genuinely unverified, and worth remembering that distinction every time one of them gets repeated. Subscribe if you want the next update the moment any of these gets real independent scrutiny. Drop below, which of these 5 numbers do you think deserves the most urgent independent audit? Talk soon.